everybody. This is your FASD team with the Florida Center bringing you the FASD Collective, Shifts That Work, where we're going to talk about survival, success, and everything in between. I'm Jen.
I'm Rosemary.
I'm Crystal.
And I'm Pam. Hi, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about shame. No, I mean consequences. Just a little joke there. But my frame of reference about consequences in my experience as a child, and unfortunately, my early attempts at parenting, was I wanted a consequence that would prevent the behavior from happening again. And sometimes that involves shame. Um, when we're desperate, we do desperate things. And so my other cohorts are going to be talking to you and giving you lots of amazing nuggets about consequences and why they don't often work for our kids on the FASD spectrum. I wanted to start the conversation though thinking about why is it so hard to stop wanting to give a consequence as a first response? So I know as a caregiver they don't work. I know they're harmful to my son. I know there's nothing I can do to make the behavior stop, but consequences are always that innate response for me. And I fight it, and I hate that I have to fight it. So I'm thinking of maybe it's tied to survival of the fittest. The person who reached out for an apple over the alligator pond didn't make it. And so that's where like early humans learned about consequences. But for me, it's a constant reminder. I am getting better, but it is still, when a new issue comes up, it's still my innate response to want to offer a consequence instead of the other supportive things we can do, like remembering this is a brain issue. This is not willful misbehavior. I could tell myself there's a gap between what my son knows is correct, but his impulses usually beat the thinking to the action. So that's where I'm kind of at with consequences. I even find the idea of natural consequences attractive. Like, oh, maybe that will save me. Um, and then just one quick story. This is an example of how we struggle with consequences. When my son was much younger, he was 13-ish, he hated brushing his teeth. He's actually always hated brushing his teeth. This has been a long-standing nightmare, and I think it's a problem for a lot of our kids. And so the professional, the pediatrician's office said, "Well, just give up. You don't worry about that. That's his job to brush his teeth." And I'm like, okay, so when he gets cavities, he'll figure it out. He'll figure out he doesn't want to have his teeth filled or he doesn't want to have his teeth pulled. And I'm so thankful that I know I don't have to listen to all the advice given and that professionals don't always know the battles we're facing. But I think those are the things caregivers are up against. And I'm going to pass it next to Rosemary. I think that was our plan. I'm so sorry. Yes, Rosemary's got some more great information on consequences for us.
Hi, everybody. Pam's right. The understanding of the actions and their behaviors and, getting from point A to point B, our kids just don't have that. So they don't attribute the consequence to the behavior, no matter how much we try to teach that. So it's like we hit our head against the wall and are frustrated, and they generally will not learn. Eventually, as they age, they start to understand consequences because the game is raised a bit. But when they're little, especially, I could never understand why timeout was so bloody hard. I felt like I was punishing myself. I have a 3-year-old who only needs to sit there for 3 minutes, and it took 20 minutes to get 3 minutes. Did either child learn a thing from that? No. Did I get frustrated and want to lose my marbles? Yes. And it's because they could not attribute the action of being stuck in timeout to the transgression that they did, pulled, had, whatever. It just never connected in their brains. And over time, I had one very wonderful social worker who was a therapist for my son, who told me like the best advice I ever got when my kids were especially little, and that is to never, ever, ever take away extracurricular activities or school activities after school as a punishment or a consequence for their behavior. They desperately need the outlet. They will not connect or are unable to connect us saying you can't play soccer on Saturday to something that happened on Tuesday. There's just no connection to it. And as many times as I thought this would be the perfect consequence, I listened to her. And it turned out that our extracurriculars, especially sports with my son and dance with my daughter, and then both kids loved bowling on a league, was is just as much of a joy for me as their parent, seeing them enjoy that, whether they played well, and my son happened to be good at sports, and my daughter held her own. It was something we always as a family could count on no matter what, and I never interrupted that time. And when you talk to my now young adult children, those memories are the ones that stuck. As much as sometimes their memories can be spotty about their childhoods, they both remember playing on the bowling leagues at the same time. And that turkey my son got once, which I barely even understand what that was, but he was also a little leaguer, and it was such joy to be able to watch him play and my daughter to get to hang out with all the little sisters playing dolls at the same time. So I've learned that though consequencing or using consequences against special activities that your child relies on are not going to change the behaviors. It is through maturity and us changing our behaviors and how we react to the things that they unfortunately sometimes delve into. My one exception to consequences is safety. There is no compromise with that. For example, my daughter never to this day at 23 years old remembers to stop and look both ways when she crosses the street. And I can't tell you how many times I nearly ripped her shirts from grabbing the clothing to stop her from walking across the street unsafely. She just knew that if she didn't stop on her own, mom was going to yank because I had to make sure she wasn't going to get harmed. And that was it. You know, I would remind her to please look both ways, or I would pull her stop and then insist that she does the act, whether, you know, to this day she still isn't great. And I have yanked a shirt or two. It is to keep her safe. And that is the one compromise I will not make is safety. Okay, Crystal, your turn.
So we know, right, with our kids with FASD, how important relationship is to them. And I heard something recently that for individuals with FASD, that strong, healthy, secure relationships are not just, they're not optional for our kids. They're not just a good idea for our kids. They're a core intervention. And for me, I just feel like that's really powerful. That it's a core intervention. And it went on to say that it can be just as vital as great therapy, educational accommodations, medications. So our relationship to our kids, you know, it's a protective factor. It's going to, when they look at kids across the lifespan too, great relationships are a huge protective factor and can help to predict how well they're going to do as adults. And so that relationship is just super, super important. And when we are using consequences, you know, our kiddos have a brain injury. We can't discipline that injury away. Um, they, because, you know, so we've been talking, right, that their brains don't connect cause and effect. So if they misbehave and then we offer a consequence, they don't understand that the consequence is because of whatever they did wrong. And they just internalize it and start to see themselves as, you know, just bad. And then, you know, that's going to break down the relationship and it's going to go against what we're trying to accomplish anyway, right? If we're trying to offer a consequence, even something, you know, I'm not saying, you know, like something terrible, but they even like with timeout, I can remember my kids when I was trying to use timeout. Rosemary, I agree with you. It was exhausting for me, and their feelings were always hurt. And I never understood for so long. I did not understand why their feelings were hurt. They just thought I was being mean to them. Um, but when we do these things, it's going to go against what we're trying to accomplish anyway, because the more they're feeling that way, the more dysregulated they're going to get, the more behaviors we're going to see. This brain injury, it doesn't just affect the cause and effect part, but their, impulse control, memory, all these things. And it's just going to lead to more big behaviors or misbehavior, and things like that anyway. So, um, it's if we can focus on connection, like when something has happened, if we can do our very best, no matter what it is that's happened right then, if we can do our best to remember that the important thing here is our connection. So let's connect with them first. Um, if they're dysregulated, can we co-regulate with them? Um, and then when they are regulated, they're in a place then to learn. Because when they're dysregulated or they're feeling like they're in trouble, they're not going to learn right then anyway. So if we can, connect, regulate, um, and then do some skill building or just talking about what happened. Again, when the time is right, don't try to do it in the moment because they're not gonna remember anyway, and they're not in a place to learn. And then we'll start to see some behavior change, and it takes a while for our guys. But if we can, the more consistent we can be with connecting first, co-regulating and building skills when they're regulated and calm, we'll see more behavior change happening. And you're right, Pam, it does not come natural. When something happens, Crystal's not like, oh, yes, I know exactly what to do. Crystal is like, oh, no, wait, I gotta wait. Don't do that, Crystal. And I've been a big proponent for visuals with our kids. I'm using visuals for my kid's mom to help remind me what not to do because it's hard in the moment. And, we deserve some grace too. Um, and we need tools to help us, stay the course and do things as best we can. So I'm going to toss it over to Jen.
Crystal, I just have to say, as a trust-based relational intervention practitioner or TBRI, like I love how much you have learned about the connecting before correcting piece. Like that's so important for our kiddos. I remember a time when my little buddy was having a tough time at school and there were some big behavioral symptoms happening. And I got a phone call from his teacher, kind of, a normal event at that point in our world. And the teacher was explaining to me what was happening in the classroom, what consequences were happening because of that at the school. And then she proceeds to tell me how they normally recommend that the parents, initiate X, Y, or Z consequence at home to kind of mirror what's happening. And I know that it was all well meant, and we live in a consequence focused world, right? Like our society is really consequence based. I just kindly explained to her, thank you for the input, thank you for the information. However, I can just go ahead and let you know we will not be utilizing that recommendation. What happens at school is a school issue. It was not a safety thing for us at home. And he was having a consequence for that at the school. The best way I had somebody talk to me about these like consequences and the continuation of it would be, let's say I make a really big mistake today at work, right? And my boss and I have like this very serious conversation. It's a big deal. I get written up, whatever the case may be. But then my boss turns around and calls my husband and tells my husband about how my big giant mistake ruined everything. We had this big issue. I got written up. I needed to have consequences at home too, because this thing happened at work. And it just really resonated with me that it's okay to compartmentalize, right? And our kids can have hiccups here and they can recover. Right? We can have a bad moment and then we can finish with a really good day. And the timing of the consequences for our kiddos a lot of times is really important. So kind of like Rosemary was saying, you can't consequence a Thursday event on a Saturday and it be able to be useful for these kiddos, because we're talking about these brain-based struggles. They have maybe impulse control challenges, maybe they're having memory struggles, right? And I've had this consequence at school, but I can't generalize and remember all of the pieces. And then I do the same thing at home, and it's just this perpetuating circle. So thinking back and just pausing to think about where their brain is at, where their capability is. Chris, I love that you're normalizing accommodations. Where can we give them an accommodation to support the need that is making the behavioral symptom happen to then need a consequence? So again, it's the brain. Like when we just pause and take it back to the brain, I feel like that's when we've been able to make the pivots that help us be most successful. And I think that you guys might agree with that. So consequences can be hard for our kids. It can be hard for us as adults, right? And I'm going to encourage you and just use my TBRI sayings here to make sure that we connect before we correct. We're going to empower their little bodies and their brains and make sure that maybe they're not just little hangry giants that need a Snickers bar. Maybe they need a nap. What can we do to support them? And how can we look at consequences differently from that brain-based perspective and maybe shift the way that we're supporting our kiddos? Because I can honestly say that got us from a point of simply surviving the days to understanding how his brain was working and the supports that he needed for my guy. And now we are truly having some success. So with that, we hope that you too could have some success in the next time that you're having to navigate some struggling symptoms with your kiddo. And that maybe when consequences are something that you would initially jump to, maybe there's something different we can do. Maybe there's another opportunity to help our kiddos learn. Maybe they need the repetition. Maybe we need some regulation. Who knows? Let's get curious about it and see how can we do consequences differently for our families with FASD. All right, guys, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Oh, Pam, I'm going to need you to edit that.